Cocaine Cowboys, the deadly rise of Ireland's drug lords. The live show is on sale now. We're on the road on February 10th at the Lime Tree Theatre in Limerick, February 15th in Cork's Everyman Theatre, and on Sunday 18th, we're back at Dublin's 3 Olympia. April takes us to Galway's Town Hall Theatre, Killarney's INEC, and Belfast's Waterfront Studios. Check mcd.ie or venue for ticket sales. The video images of Noel Boylan running for his life into a Lidl supermarket back in 2019 are still etched in my brain.
Yeah.
Of course, Noel Boylan was running for his life. He was being shot at. The gunman was having difficulties with his gun. It was jamming.
Yeah.
And there was just like customers everywhere with their trolleys and their baskets. Just, I mean, you could just picture yourself going in round, picking up the bananas on down, pot meat, led by all the rest of it. And of course, in the middle of it all was the crew from Virgin Media TV who were filming inside the K, who captured it.
Yeah, I mean, they captured the immediate aftermath. Noel Boylan, of course, had been shot at that stage in the back, I think, and I remember the police are coming up asking him for a bit of info, and he's basically, even though he's shot, and he's telling them to go. Yeah, basically. Yeah. I mean, it was incredible stuff. I mean, it was obviously, although it's, it was wild, it's obviously a hugely serious thing. I mean, you cannot underestimate the danger of people firing handguns in that manner in a packed place. You know, the possibility when you see these guys who are shooting them as well, like they're not marksmen. I mean, the possibility of people being killed, is innocent people who are bystanders. It's incredibly dangerous, incredibly wrong, and you cannot have that sort of thing going on.
Very difficult, apparently, to shoot a moving target.
I'm sure it is, and these guys are not being, let's be honest, they're not being trained. So it was a hugely dangerous incident, but it was incredible footage, just to see it going on in that manner.
And equally difficult to try and shoot while you're running. So, I mean, from both those points of view, it was a miracle really that the gun did jam and that nobody was injured. But like, I'm sure anybody in the supermarket that day will never forget it.
No.
He ran in seeking refuge, and he sort of ended up pitching up kind of
on an aisle, basically.
On an aisle on one of the sort of the biscuit stands or something.
Yeah.
And while the ambulance crew came to attend to him, he refused to give any statements. He refused to give any help to the Gardaí who arrived. And Noel Boylan, of course, was a very well-known individual with a criminal background and who had like serious associates in the criminal underworld. He was a one-time pal of Christy Kinahan Senior, amongst others. He was in fear for his life. His life was under threat. He and his son Lee Boylan would both end up surviving shooting attempts in and around the same time, I think. But we'll get to that, maybe the reasons why they were under threat at that time. But there was a court case this week in the Central Criminal Court, and Derek Byrne, a 40-year-old with an address in Swords, who was originally charged with attempting to murder Noel Boylan, pleaded guilty to purchasing the car used by the gunman on behalf of an organised crime gang. Yeah,
so Derek Byrne pled guilty, and it's one of these long sort of charges that we've seen more and more come before the courts under the anti-gangland laws. It's intentionally, the charge is intentionally facilitating the commission of a serious offence by a criminal organisation, namely the attempted murder of Noel Boylan, with the knowledge of the existence of the said criminal organisation. So it's just, I suppose what it is that it's not an attempted murder charge. They don't obviously have sufficient evidence maybe to bring him to that, but it's also the facilitation is where these gangland laws are being used, and they're basically saying, you bought this car, you knew it was being bought by a crime gang, you knew it wasn't to go shopping in Lidl, you knew it was going to be used for a criminal purpose, and that purpose could have included the murder up to including something along those lines, and therefore these people are now getting they're getting done basically for conspiracy, something broadly along the lines of conspiracy. And he's pled guilty to this. As we've seen a lot of people that have come before the courts on these charges, they presumably get the book of evidence and plead at a late stage. And they look at that and say, yes, that can be proven. And they reach a guilty plea.
So what was this car and where was it coming from and what was the detail given around that?
So, I mean, I think back 20 years ago, when we would have been doing gangland murders, a lot of these...
in school.
Yes, possibly. But no, I'm not even going to be
calculator.
No. So a lot of those hits were carried out with people in stolen cars. But in recent years, even over the last decade, it's become more and more common for people to buy cars on done deal or over the internet. When they're carrying out gangland hits. We've seen it again and again in loads of different cases. There's probably a few reasons for that. One of them being it's probably harder to rob certain modern cars. There's probably a risk in going around in a stolen car, and it's just not as easily done as it once was. So Derek Byrne bought this car basically on done deal. Now, when you buy a car on done deal, it's you hand over the money and you get the car basically. If you use a false name or whatever, it's really up to yourself to use your own name if you want to register this car. Mm-hmm. So that's how a lot of these things are being done. And Derek Byrne had a significant criminal past himself. He previously was caught in possession of a handgun in County Westmeath. He also had a range of other convictions, some of them traffic offences and all of that, but also other serious offences as well. He bought the car. The car was eventually traced to the person who had sold it to him. That person, totally innocent, knew nothing about the ultimate movement, just said, I sold it on done deal. And eventually it was traced to Derek Byrne. He had originally, I think, suggested he knew nothing about what it was going to be used for, but ultimately had to plead guilty in this case.
And so the court heard that it was 5:15 on the 1st of June 2019, lovely bright evening. And Boylan was kind of basically walking in the area where this little supermarket was when he was approached from behind with a man in a hood. And the guy in the hood appears to have got out of the back of this car. Yeah. He shot at him and hit him once and then went to shoot again, went to discharge another shot, and obviously it didn't work, the gun. Yeah. So the CCTV showed this shooter basically trying to shoot into the supermarket after him.
Yeah, and kind of reload it. I can't remember what term they used in court.
Now, CCTV also captured this shooter getting into the car, and the car drives off. So there was a two-man hit team basically. Now the shooter hasn't as of yet been identified or been brought before the courts. So the events has left the scene and drove off to North County Dublin. Again, the way it drove was caught along the CCTV cameras along the way. The vehicle was burnt out in Swords and the two men were seen running from it. There was a 9mm round of ammunition and a bullet jacket later recovered by Gardaí from that scene. So they ran off basically, having missed their target essentially and left behind chaos. Yeah,
I mean, Noel Boylan would have been well known to Gardaí. He had been previously jailed for his role in an attempted armed robbery in 2006, a kind of a high-profile heist attempt. He was always known as an associate of Christy Kinahan Sr. I think that would have come more from the past than maybe at the stage in which he was an attempted assassination. They would have known each other,
way back,
way back.
When he would have been a young teenager, early 20s.
Exactly. He would have had an association with Christy Kinahan.
And here in Ireland, as opposed to when Kinahan migrated to the...
Exactly. So he sort of, that was his kind of vintage. He would have been, had a reputation as a kind of a hard man type. And obviously then he had his own son was also the target of an assassination attempt. And Lee Boylan would have had links with what became known as the Gucci gang. That's those sort of younger generation of criminals based around who were operating in sort of Coolock and Finglas areas, including Sean Little, who was ultimately shot dead. Lee Boylan would have palled around with them, would have been very active on social media, very much amongst that scene.
Certainly Sean Little and maybe Zach Parker, who was murdered in the January of 2019, and others that they were friendly with. We'd kind of call them the sort of Instagram gangsters.
Yeah.
They were, when you say they're active on social media, certainly Sean Little and Parker and others would have all put up their travels on their social media sites. They'd have been photographed with, drinking Moët and Chandon and, holidaying and off and off in this sort of at these parties at Zerky Beach. They were regulars at the Ocean Beach Club in Ibiza.
Yeah.
Very well travelled for young 20, 21, 22-year-olds.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of, generation they were.
Yeah. Now, Lee Boylan, however, was very, very lucky to escape with his life. And he was shot as he was in a vehicle. Gunmen approached him and fired a number of bullets into his body. And certainly initially it was believed that he would not survive, or that if he did survive, it would be with catastrophic injuries.
Yeah.
Certainly, I think, remember in the aftermath, people believed that he wasn't going to make it. However, he did make it, and ultimately made a miraculous recovery. I think it would be fair to say. So there was a very complicated series of feuds going on in the area at that time. It was kind of in the maybe came in the aftermath of the sort of breakdown of the gangland structures that had been put in place by the Kinahan cartel and a number of senior figures in the Kinahan cartel. And these younger guys seemed to come in and try and fill the vacuum. And Lee Boylan, it is believed, was targeted by one of these gangs. And ultimately, one man was prosecuted for his role in the murder. Or in the attempted murder. Again, it was a guy called Alan Graham. He was from Limerick. He was he'd previously served a lengthy sentence for drug dealing. He was, again, it was believed he was brought in from the outside rather than being somebody who had a personal animosity against Lee Boylan. He was, again, I'm going to dig it out there, ultimately what he was prosecuted with, but it was a similar charge to the one that was brought against Derek Byrne, where it was again under these anti-gangland legislations, and it was...
He pleaded guilty to having knowledge of the existence of a criminal organisation and participating in activities with the intention of facilitating the commission by the criminal organisation of the offence of attempted murder. So that was that's the same offence, actually, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's something, it's something very similar.
As the one for the father.
Yeah.
So the Boylans, the father and son, what was going on? Was that all part of the sort of the row between that offshoot of the Gucci gang? I mean, Noel Boylan was a lot older than those kind of youngsters are.
Yeah, so I mean, these attempted hits there was a number of players in it, and a number of shootings played a role in the fallout. Obviously, you've done podcasts before on the Monkey Gang, I think, with Ken Foy.
Yeah.
They were and still remain significant players in the drug scene in North Dublin, but they certainly had a falling out with some of Lee Boylan's associates. They would have had ties with a number of gangs across the country, including one of the feuding gangs in Drogheda, and they're believed to have played a role in the attempted murder of Lee Boylan. Behind a lot of it, of course, as well, was the in terms of those two shootings, there was a fallout from the murder of Eric Fowler. Eric Fowler was, although he had no convictions of note, he was regarded as a key figure in the Kinahan cartel's operations in Dublin. Somebody known a close pal and associate of Ross Browning. He was ultimately shot dead. And again, that's another complicated murder. Who did what? You know,
he was shot dead at his home in Blakestown Cottages, which was the place where the hitman Imre Arakas had been arrested, having been put under surveillance. And it was where an encrypted phone was photographed, and messages deemed to have come directly from Dubai from Daniel Kinahan and Sean McGovern was found, and evidence was gathered there. And I mean, I certainly at the time of his murder, it was suggested that there was a huge embarrassment amongst the Kinahan organisation that Imre Arakas was arrested in Ireland, that they had believed that the Irish Gardaí were so busy and stupid that there was no way they'd know who Arakas was, and that he was safe as houses coming in on a plot, on a mission to kill James Mago Gately at the time. And that the embarrassment that was levelled against the Kinahan organisation internationally by the fact that Arakas was picked up was enough for them maybe to kind of throw blame on somebody. It was suggested that, Daniel Kinahan may have quite, happily sanctioned the murder of Eric Fowler in a kind of face-saving exercise internationally.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Eric Fowler, the suspicion is, while it's not exactly ordered by Daniel Kinahan from Dubai, he certainly gave it the nod that it could occur. Or at least that he wasn't going to, stand in the way of it. So Eric Fowler is believed to have been shot by sort of local criminals in the area who may have been told they could do what they want. But there was a series of falling out from that. Lee Boylan is obviously not a suspect in any of the Fowler shooting, but some of the people that were known to his friends, are probably suspected for actually carrying out that shooting.
But around that time when the father and son survived those attempted assassinations, there was a really complex situation going on, and it seemed as if there was feuds within feuds within feuds, and then there was kind of these sort of very chaotic characters, including Rue Redmond, knocking around, trying to collect drug debts, feeling all of a sudden there was no control because the Kinahan operation had as such collapsed or had been dismantled in the country. A lot of their key players were locked up. And I can recall around that time, probably 2019, 2018, 19, it was difficult to keep a handle on who was feuding with who. Yeah. They seemed to be constantly falling out, and there was a kind of a sort of a free-for-all attitude on the streets shooting.
I mean, remember,
rivals.
Most of these people would have been friends with each other at one stage, so it wasn't like, that there was these two separate geographical gangs fighting with each other. So look, it was a very serious situation. I mean, it's amazing Lee Boylan survived. We saw him come before court, I think it was the last year, looking to get a taxi license. He was in a dispute with the taxi regulator who believed he shouldn't have been given a license to drive a taxi. And we saw him walk into court and fight that case. I don't think he won it in the end. But if you remember at the time, I mean, he was very, very lucky to survive. And there really was a belief that he wouldn't make it. So, and I think his own father as well, ultimately it was reported how he ended up getting married then himself.
Good to say that. I remember what you were mentioning to me about.
What? That was over lunch.
Yeah.
What was it?
Was it a private conversation we were having? Was it not for the listeners to join in on this? Because it was an interesting little theory you had.
No, I was just saying that these guys that we do, and certainly not talking about the Boylans, but we sometimes do stories about these guys who are in prison for the most horrendous of crimes. Yeah. And they're not necessarily gorgeous looking guys.
No.
And they come out of prison and they're signing on registers or whatever. And then they still manage to pick up a girlfriend. That's always amazing.
And your reasoning for that was that if you just give, what was it, a little bit of attention, you're sorted.
A little bit of commitment.
A little bit of commitment, sorry, so yes.
Women are willing to overlook a lot as long as they don't have a commitment-phobic boyfriend.
You could find yourself cancelled with this theory, actually. But in other words, what you were saying was that, once he showed enough commitment, this guy, to say, hey, hon, how you doing?
Yeah. Listen to the day. How did your day go?
She sent back, thanks for thinking of me. How's your day go? What are you up to? I'm just signing on the sex offenders. That was enough to keep the relationship going.
Yeah. Well, look, exactly. There's an odd sock for every shoe.
There is. I agree with you totally. But anyway, yes, both the Boylans have since seemed to have found
moved on
partners and moved on from their life of crime, perhaps, and settled down now with their ladies.
Yeah. So, thank you very much.
Thanks for that.
A heartwarming end to an episode of Crime World.
Yeah, and what we'll do is we'll maybe stick you on some sort of a,
what?
Love advice show or something like that.
I did say maybe it's time for me to launch my own wellness podcast. Do you don't think so? No? There is a clamour.
Yeah, and who would you have on?
Well, I
could
just
talk to yourself.
I might interview myself. Nicola.
Yeah.
I can't think of anybody more interesting to interview.
Wellness podcast, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yoga, maybe do a bit of yoga or something for a video, for the video.
Listen, I'm going to suggest that in here for you for the new year.
Yeah.
And we'll come up with a name for it.
Yeah.
Niall Donald's love and life advice.
Big time. Yeah. Massive hit.
Right, stick to the crime, I would say. Thanks, Niall.
Thank you.
I'm Nicola Tallant and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.